I've known John Fink for a really long time. He's a wonderful ceramic artist and a beloved teacher, and I think a pretty all-around really nice guy. So, so we can see that he has he's donating some work for auction and proceeds to go to the Guild. So after the meeting, which we're going to have a really nice presentation from John and his son John, and his son really did a great thing tonight by putting together a video for us, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards, and I think we're ready to go.
So when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I sensed that I wanted to be an artist. I was always drawing from the time I could hold a pencil or a crayon.
Did you have any teachers that influenced you in that direction?
Only later, much later. But I was pretty much a self-starter and fairly creative in what I drew.
Were the subjects in your school or your high school mostly art, or were there other influences that got you to where you started your college education?
I took a required class in art in middle school, but after that I didn't take any formal art courses. I just worked on my own, doing other things that were required of me. It wasn't until I got into college where I started taking art courses.
You really didn't have in mind before you went to college that you were going to be an artist. What were you doing or wanted to do at the time before you discovered art as a possibility?
I didn't even know I was going to go to college. The friends I hung out with, one day we were going to go out west of town, and there was a nice big field out there, and hit some flies and grounders with baseball. We cut our activity short because those two had appointments to go to the local university at Millikan University to take entrance exams. They were surprised that I wasn't going to go to college. I had a job to go to. So I went out there with them, and they got checked in and were standing in line to get the envelope they were passing out, and they went in to take this entrance exam. I don't know whether she was the dean or what, but anyway, she says, "I don't find your name here on the list." And I said, "Well, I'm not here to take the test. I'm waiting for my friends." Well, she says, "They're going to be in there for an hour or so. So why don't you just take this manila envelope with the stuff in it and do the test yourself?" So I said, okay. I left before they did, and we went out and continued to play baseball. I guess it was about 3 weeks later, maybe, I don't know. My mother says, "Here's an envelope from Millikan University to you. What's that about?" I said, "I have no idea." Opened it up, and to my surprise, they said I was being admitted in the fall to classes. And my mother says, "I didn't know you were going to go to college." And I said, "I'm not going to college." And then she started crying. "I want you to go to college." So that was that.
What were you doing for work? You mentioned you had a job.
I worked in a high fashion men's clothing store in town. I had worked there a couple of years in high school. That's what I was going to go to. And they had me in a few weeks from that time to be a manager of the high school and college shop. And when I did enroll at Millikan for 2 courses in late afternoon and evening, I think it was business courses. I continued doing that. One time I was taking an accounting course. The professor was reviewing for a final. My friend looked over at me and said, "You're drawing. Aren't you going to pay attention to what's going to be on the final?" I said, "Well, I can hear. I can do 2 things at once." Often, when I'm talking on the phone, I do doodles and draw things. And she says, "You're always drawing. I don't know why you're not an art major."
Did you attend any school or training after high school before you went to Millikan University to explore art?
After leaving that accounting course, I immediately went down to the art department and talked to the chair of the department. I said I'd like to take some art courses. He said, well, we're only accepting people for majors. I said, I can't take one or two courses. He says, well, we haven't been doing that. I said, well, suppose I take a drawing course and a painting course, and if I do a grade of B or better, you'll accept me into the program.
Was your study in college specifically fine arts, or was there an area that you had grown into? How did that work?
Well, I did take a clay course, a ceramic course, out of curiosity about what it was about. And in fact, by that time, I had met Leah, and we decided we'd take ceramics together. And that's how I finally decided this is the one for me. And I'm not talking about ceramics.
What were the other mediums that you were working on before you discovered sculpture or pottery that you were focusing on?
Just, drawing and painting.
You have a number of different oil and sketching prints that I've seen over the years. That was sort of the beginning of your art medium until you changed over.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that the structure of creativity is different between drawing, painting, and sculpture, or is it about the same in your frame of mind of level of creativity?
Painting, you can have a space to work in, so it's cleaner than working with clay. I recall I was taking graduate courses at NYU and working on some large paintings, 4x5, 4x6, something like that. But we lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and I was trying to paint in there where we slept and kept our clothes, etc., etc. The paintings were so large I couldn't get far enough away from them because of the small space to tell what they really looked like. I recall one evening, it was almost like midnight. We lived on the first floor, and I had borrowed the superintendent's stepladder, and so I went around to the bedroom window and put it up there and looking in the window to see how my painting looked that I was working on. Somebody called the cops. They thought I was a peeping Tom, and I discovered the cops when they came up behind me and asked what I was doing up there. And so when I explained what I was doing, and they said, really? At midnight you're working on a painting? Yeah, get up on the ladder and take a look at it. So they did. It was a very abstract piece of work. The cop that was on the ladder turned around and looked down at me and says, it must be important to work on it at 12 midnight. Can you make a living at this?
Did you have any influential professors or mentors in college?
I did. The first one in college was Russell Hausman. He was the chairperson in the art department. And then I had some really very good teachers at New York University. Interesting that New York University hired professional artists who were living in Lower Manhattan. Esteban Vincente, he was a very good teacher. Hale Woodruff, he was a very good teacher. Hausman was really a mentor of mine.
In what way did Russ Hausman help you focus on your teaching career?
He had been a professor at Millikan, and we became quite friendly. Leah and I were married and lived in married housing adjacent to Bobby and Russ Hausman. I was older than most of the students, so we became good friends. And it was later when Leah and I were teaching in the suburb of Chicago and got a phone call. And it was Russ, and we from time to time talked on the phone. But he was suggesting that if we moved out to the East Coast, to Long Island, that he could have a position for me. He's forming the faculty at a school called Nassau Community College, where he was the chairperson. And so he was suggesting that he'd like to have me on the faculty. He said, think about it. So we did.
You didn't start doing college teaching. You went to where before that?
Well, I got a job at Mineola Junior High School and taught an adjunct in the evening at Nassau. I think I did that for 2 years, and then they hired me full-time, teaching a wide variety of courses. There were two other people besides Russ on the faculty. Each of us had a range of art history, drawing, painting, and so on.
With the type of work that you've done over the years, you focused on a mythological creature that you called Dino Critters. How did that begin? What was the core concept behind?
Well, that started maybe 50 years ago when my son and daughter were very young children. They asked if they could come out and play with clay in my studio. So I said, okay, you play with clay, and I'm going to go over and work on this sculpture. I forget what I was building at that time. It wasn't long before, I don't know whether it was my son John or whether my daughter Elisa said, Dad, make some animals. Come over and make some animals. So I went over and fashioned a couple of things, and one of the things that I did, oh, that's interesting. I began making a few animals, and at some point, someone of my fellow artists said, you ought to go after that. And also take these and demonstrate them in the public schools. Right now, BOCES is wanting a lot of artists for their program called the Art and Education. It sort of grew out of that. And over at least 10 years, I went to an awful lot of schools, spending a full day and either doing modeling of clay representing these dino critters, as I called them, or working on the potter's wheel. Kids need art in their lives, and they can be overloaded with too many academics. It gives them a different kind of space to work in. And that's what the BOCES program was about.
The organic conception of these Dino Critters, how were they received, both amongst your peers and also the program that you described?
They were received in a very positive way. In fact, some of the people who have grown into adults and who live in the community says, "Oh, I remember when I was in school, and I remember that program that you give." And other teachers that live in the community, they know me by my artistic endeavors.
The building of the fantasy world, the underlying story of their existence, how did that develop and what was it?
Well, I spontaneously create various kinds of characters, and some of those became characters within an environment that I construct, either out of clay or wood or mixed materials. I can think of one that has an old clock motor and these two Dino Critter characters. I think the title of the piece was called Saving Time. The characters were holding parts to a clock as if they were going to repair them.
I remember one piece that you had where you made up a story of how rubber off tires disappeared into the world.
Oh.
Can you tell a little bit about that backstory?
Oh, it came out of a conversation. I have two artists that I meet on a regular basis for breakfast. There was an article in the paper, something about the closing of a Firestone tire factory, and somebody raised the question, well, we have to repair these tires that we drive our cars on, and they wear the tires out, but where does all that rubber go to? We started laughing and making up scenarios about where they went to.
Tell me a little bit about the facial expressions of some of these Dino Critters, because they're all unique to one another.
Yeah, they're very expressive. And also the body language. The facial expression and the body language tells a story. What's exciting for the kids who observe these demonstrations is that the transformation of what is happening. You start out with a nothing lump of clay and end up with a very expressive piece. So at the end of a day, I would have probably created 5 or 6 pieces. I always left one of the characters at the school after I was finished. But to sum it up, these are fun pieces. Children, they respond to them immediately, and adults as well. I've left some of these characters that I've modeled at a school, so they have it for their collection. They have to be glazed. They have to become permanent. Most of the schools have kilns and an art program, but these Dino Critters, copyrighted term, is collected by a lot of people throughout the country. I've been doing these for, 20 years.
the years that you've taught pottery to not only grade school but at National Community College, what were your overall goals in teaching pottery, and how did you focus on the education of it?
Well, I want students to be excited about having made something. Making things, especially if it's usable, like a mug or a cup or a bowl or whatever, it's symbolic, the challenge that they made. And of course, I encourage them to be persistent and to finally get it. We all made, in the beginning, several different clumps of clay that you didn't have much regard for. But when they do begin to be able to save things and be excited about them, they take them home. Most all of the students that I teach on at Nassau Community, they're 20-year-olds. They're taking the class for humanities credit. Some will say, Mr. Fink, I think my sister took a class with you. I said, is that true? And then several years later, someone will say, Mr. Fink, my mother thinks she had a class with you. And then several years later, my grandmother said she took a class with you. So there's a continuity that comes from the passing on of the excitement of making things. It's good for the soul.
Within your own work, starting a new project on the potter's wheel, do you have a specific goal in mind, and how much of that deviates from the start to finish?
Oh, it deviates all the time. I don't make sets of mugs or cups. I have a general height that I make them. Sometimes I'll sit down and make half a dozen whose capacity is about a cup and a half. Then I'll do 6 more that are mugs, 2-cup content. So I know pretty much from beginning to end what they're going to be, what my goal is. If I have a whole day to devote, I can probably make a couple of dozen a day, and then I wear out. I make shapes on the potter's wheel and then distort them. I can make a piece that's completely closed off, almost like an egg shape, and use that for the basis of making a human head. Well, as a ceramic artist working with clay, it's taught me a lot about life and living. For me, it's a metaphor for happiness and a sense of peace in my life. Clay has a nature, and as a beginning artist, like my students, I sought to understand and control that nature so that I might create pottery and sculpture that I wanted. I've noticed that some of the same forces that shape a form on the potter's wheel are some of the same forces that shape one's life. In order to make a shape on the potter's wheel, the soft clay must be aligned and centered to get the wobbles out. Unless it is centered, it will waver, wobble, and probably collapse. We spend a lifetime getting the wobbles out of our lives, getting things on center. Unless our lives are disciplined and governed by a hierarchy of values, life has no focus, no design. Sacred art calls forth our own spirit, connecting us with the mystery of being and the hidden power of life. Such art is enabling, for it becomes a messenger and a guide of one's spirit. Inspired and sacred art accompanies us on our individual and communal journeys. I so believe that once you get so good at the work, you're in a very spiritual, sacred place. Handmade pottery gives you something more than its usefulness for drinking tea and coffee, or a bowl of soup or dessert. Each one is unique, and it's formed by craftsmen like myself, shaping it through the experienced pressure of one's hand. Something of the creator is imparted by the design and the decision making, and perhaps symbolically, it represents something of the person who made it. When you choose to use a handmade cup, perhaps it is for the pleasure of its color, perhaps it's its shape. In my own kitchen, I have at least a dozen of my cups in the cupboard, and invariably I'll choose from just a couple of my favorites, even taking the time to wash them if they're not among the clean ones. In the forming of cups and the adding of the soft clear handles. I often squeeze them, leaving a void, a handprint, and then as a finishing touch, I add a thumb tab. And in all of this, whether it's something about the shape or the feel of it, the color that makes what one would otherwise be routine taking of coffee, perhaps there's something more. That shape, that color is something more than a common, ordinary styrofoam cup. It is one of the reasons I'm a potter. My musician teacher friend Nancy, she received a few of my cups for her birthday, and in a thank you note to me, she remarked how special they were. Not only because I made them, but because she particularly likes the handles with those thumb tabs on the top. She says that it is interesting to look around the table at a dinner guest as they hold on to their cups for the whole duration of drinking and conversation. They don't seem to take their hands and fingers off of the handles.
Glazing. Most of the time when you create something, do you have a thought in mind how you would like to glaze it, or is there somewhere in the middle of a mad scientist experimentation that you have during the process?
The mad scientist is at work all the time, I guess. But glazing is when you have a milkshake consistency of minerals that have been mixed together. A formula in such that you apply either by brushing on or dunking the glaze and pouring it on. Once you have applied those minerals to the mug or cup, it goes into the kiln to be baked, to be fired. A lot of people are so unsure of applying that glaze and what it's going to look like, because we have a saying, the kiln always has its say. But it's a glaze is a baked on or fired on coating of glass. Most of my glazes are fired at roughly 2200 degrees Fahrenheit. And of course you have to wait 12, 15, 20 hours for the heat of the kiln to cool off.
There have been many different types of mediums that you've used over the years, but sculpture seems to be a strong medium. What types of sculpture have you made over the years, and is there a creative narrative set before the form and function of a piece?
Mostly the sculpture I've made in recent years are placed out in our gardens, the outdoor pieces, and then of course the indoor pieces. But ceramic, for the most part, is weather resistant. The sun, the rain, the snow wear on the glaze, but they'll usually last for 25 or 30 years before the glaze starts changing in some fashion. I have a couple of pieces that have been in the garden for probably 25 or 30 years, and I like the finish, the weathering of the glaze better than what it was when I first put it out. As we appreciate our flower gardens and we have paths that we walk, and as we turn a corner on the path, I have a sculpture there for a surprise. Also have had 2 to 3 fountains. The warm weather there, such a welcoming sound, gurgling of the water. Also, it attracts a lot of birds. Their song is also appreciated. And they're also eating a lot of insects and mosquitoes too. So it's much easier to spend a day or an evening enjoying the garden, sitting in a chair, maybe having a meal inside the gazebo. Well, this is the entryway to a garden and also one of the doors to the studio. I think this is a good representation of the spiritual side of this property. It's an entryway, and there are tiles that I've embedded into the stone postwork that important people live here. As you go through that gate, you bless yourself every time you go through it because of the people represented here. If you notice on the fence to the right are some castings that myself and our friend Michael Ann, she had some of her students come, and mine too, and we did some making of molds and casting of cement. That's an extension of friendship. you'll see on the other side of the fence, this little sliver there of white in the middle. That's a 6-foot high sculpture. On the pedestal, on one of the posts, this grouping of figures that I call the committee. There's one of the individuals, sometimes jokingly referred to him as Darth Vader. There are all kinds of people that serve on committees. Perhaps there are some that you've served on that has an individual like this. I had my family press their hands into the softwood tiles, and I embedded in the cement. That post represents a lot of manpower. I should have started on those 30 years before I did. There's some symbols. And here are two other friends that always, they're outside, they always, they're at the gate to greet. They have their paw prints in these tiles too. I'm interested in portraying the spiritual reality of our lives. And here's one, some of our spirits coming to visit. That's an old spirit, obviously. So this is one of the entrances of the studio. On either side, there are tiles that are mounted on some lattice work. Interesting, at some point, there was a dove that built a nest on top of that skull up there. I brought that back from Arizona, and when I took it down to the UPS office, he says, well, we can ship that back for you, but I have to know, is there any meat on that skull? This is late Friday afternoon, and it's going to be sitting on the shelf in here. It's really hot outside, and we don't want to face any peculiar odors when we come in on Monday morning. The second floor of the studio, it could have been, all the time we lived there, could have been a studio apartment. It's heated, but I only used it for storage. Another example of what's around the surrounding. I've made several sculptures that are designed to be fountains, and this one is in a small pond. I had fish, you can see the goldfish reflection down at the base. Those fish didn't last long because the egrets, they'd come by and do some fishing, as well as the resident raccoons. When it was real hot, raccoons, they routinely would jump in the pool to cool off. This is my studio in one phase of time. I have a slab roller there that works as a mechanized rolling pin, quickly and easily roll some sheets of clay out. All the benches and equipment here have wheels on them. So depending on what it is I'm working on, I may need to rearrange the so-called furniture and equipment in here to make a positive contribution to the task at hand. I stick some of these things on the wall because they're friendly things of the past. When I was a kid, I loved Cheerios and Quaker Oats, etc. You'll see a couple of dog collars hanging down. These belong to dogs that we've had in the past. Their paw prints is in a slab of clay up there in the upper left. Picture of my good friend Robert Carter up at the top. We've been friends for a long time. Here's another part of the workspace for wheel work. And sometimes the cars are parked there and sometimes not. Awful lot of greenery around this studio. To the left, over here on the countertop, are some large bowls that just been trimmed, ready to go into the kiln. Speaking of kilns, here's 3 of them. During the 1980s, when I was very busy fulfilling orders from some of the shops that I had work in, I had all 3 of these kilns going. The heat coming off of that was something to behold. Long Island Lighting Company, I was beholden to them because of the electricity used. I have a separate meter for the studio and a separate meter for the house. Working in clay has been a wonderful life experience. I think there are 2 important times in my life, and that was when I was born and finding out why I was born. I was born to work in clay, become an artist, and be a teacher. John spent a lot of time on this video. I spent a lot of time organizing all the images, and so anyway, it was entertaining for me too. I thought, oh, I said that. Do you have any questions about what you saw?
How long did you teach in that for?
I started when my hair was dark. Um, I, I, I retired full-time and, I completed 35 years of teaching. And then I stayed on for another 20 years, I suppose, teaching adjunct. I just love teaching. It's, to see people discover that they can make something. And that heard somebody say, well, I took these mugs home and I invited some people to come for coffee, and I told them I had made these things. And said, you made them? I said, yeah, I made them. So it says that it really does wonders for your esteem when you get someone to handle those things. And so anyway, we live in Northport in an old Victorian house, and I knew that was the place for me because it had a separate building in the back, and it was 2 stories, and it was a place where I could work. My dogs, when we had dogs, used to hang out there with me. So it was a marvelous life. But we have another door opening for ourselves, and we'll be moving and selling a house and moving, and to a place called North Shore Towers. So there are all kinds of things to get interested in there. Leah and I both have a long history of gardening. There's a place to do gardening, swimming, indoors, outdoors, etc. So anyway, it's great to share this with you. Yeah.
When we met, I got to use those mugs, and I never took my thumb off them up. I loved every one of them. They traveled with us everywhere. We always got people, I want that mug. Sure, they were just favorite.
In Juneau, Alaska. I'm glad. I'm glad.
I know the thumb. Never, ever move that thumb.
That thumb rest. Yeah, my friend Nancy, I may have said that in the video, that when she got those as a birthday gift, her husband came and selected some, and she was I love this thumb rest. It's Sloan Things commercial.
All this stuff is also made out of clay, or did you work in Halloween as well?
One of the images of this outdoor sculpture that's about 6 feet tall, it's a combination of ceramic and cement and steel. The steel sort of framed the rectangular piece. If you were to see a close-up of the images that are on it, it's really about, for me anyway, about how do we come into this world and how do we leave. I have a spiritual idea that we're all spiritual beings, and we either come here of our own spiritual mission or we were sent here. So that's it.
I just wanted to say that I've been a craft guild member since 1980. And I worked in clay for 30 years. And I just remember the early days with you and Nancy Baldwin and Andy Quint and so many people. And the clay group was the group to be in at that time. We were bringing in the money with workshops. We were having a blast.
Yeah.
Potter's pig outs. We had so much fun, and those are really, really good days. And
come to one another's homes for dinner.
yeah,
Uh,
we traded we traded hosting and all that.
yeah. Had a good time, all right.
Yep, and I have to tell you, no paper plates. No styrofoam cups. Those were good days. And I have a mug of yours at home, John, and I have a Dino Critter at home. And I mean, at my studio, I have a Dino Critter, so.
Hallelujah.
So thanks. It was a really nice video. Thank you.
Like when I was a kid, I remember going into your basement studio and seeing all the sculptures with the melted army guys. Could you tell like the backstory on that? Like I didn't know, was there a message or what were you trying to, like I was just a little kid, I just remember.
When we were members of the Levittown Church, it was during the Vietnam War era. The pastor invited us to make some sort of commentary from a Christian point of view. And mine was kind of a dirty Christian point of view. I had this, what had been a big burner for my oil furnace. But so these little green soldiers that you can buy by hundreds at the toy store, they were on a conveyor belt to go into this apparatus and then spit out into a puddle. And some of the church members didn't like it so much. So I said, okay, I'm a sinner, go to hell. So anyway, that's what that was about. And
Were they plastic? Yes. Green?
say again?
I mean, they were plastic?
They're the green army men
Yeah.
that you buy in big
Yeah.
bulk packages.
So I take a propane torch and change the shape of them, and they soften up pretty easily. But I've done a lot of, well, I don't know about a lot, but I've done probably a dozen anti-war pieces. And in fact, I have one of them, or two of them in the studio right now. Leah and I have been, during that era, Vietnam, we did a lot of marching. I don't know, my daughter has inherited the gene, and she goes to a lot of protests, peaceful ones. I went to one down in Washington where they showed up with football helmets. They only wear a football helmet. So we were tear gassed and physically bruised. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you for many years of looking at the two beautiful heads that you gave my husband and I. Oh, it's got to be over 30 years ago, the heads.
Yeah.
And we always looking at us and say, okay, which one is you and which one is
Oh,
that is still on my desk. They are in great condition. They're not broken, they are on the desk. I look at them every day when I get up.
I have, that's what I feel about that entryway to our garden. We passed through that, and the handprints, and even we have paw prints from the dogs and in that place. But it's something that's, and also you notice on the studio wall there was the Lone Ranger posted there, and Wheaties box top, and it's those things are things that remind me of my past. When I was a kid, I thought that I wanted to be an artist, and I got a lot of compliments from adults, and so I accumulated a lot of drawings and paintings, and I was about 5, 6 years old, and I got the idea that if I could probably sell these. So I went around the neighborhood knocking on the doors, and asking people if they want to buy some art. And I sold maybe half a dozen or so. And so I don't know, it was that day or another couple of days later, my mother said, "Where'd you get this money?" And I said, "Well, I sold my painting." She was so embarrassed. I didn't understand that. So she marched me over to the various people, made me say where I'd sold them. And none of them wanted to give, to accept any money. And Sarah Salmon, she says, "Well, I'd like to buy a couple more." So that's my mother's appreciation of art.
Oh, I just wanted to say, thank you so much, John Jr., for your thoughtful interview questions. I think you have a new career budding there. And thank
I'm
you.
already in career with that.
Okay, well, it shows. And thank you for the excellent video. That was really wonderful. Thank you, John, for sharing your work with us and for having been such a valued member all these years. And we wish you good luck in your move and the
Thank
best of everything yet to come.
Thank you.